Welcome back. We're now going to go on to creating tables within our database. In our previous video, we talked about how to set up a database and just some of the basics which were inside there and the gotchas involved. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at table generation. Now, we're going to do some cheats in a little while. But first of all, we just need to have a look at what a table looks like. By default, when you expand the database, you'll see that tables is completely empty. What I'm going to do is right click and do new table. But we've got all these different ones inside here. What on earth do they all mean? Well, for now, table. These come later. They're all different types of table, which have been introduced over the years. We started off just with tables, then we had file tables, which came in, and also memory optimized tables, which came in a similar sort of time. Temporal ledger, graph, and external tables, they're all interesting in their own right, and they deserve a separate video. So for now, we're at the basics. We're going to just go to table. So once I've clicked onto table, I should now get a grid coming up and it's asking me what do I want to give the names. Now, I have got the next video is going to be talking completely about data types and the absolute importance of nailing them correctly. So for now, I'm not going to really spend much time on data types other than just say this is text, this is number, and that's it. The next video coming up is going to go into data types on a much deeper dive. So I'm just going to put in an ID column. I press tab on the keyboard, which immediately jumps me onto the next column. It's asking me for a data type of nchar. Now that's just basically text. Now I want this to be an ID number, so I can click onto here and I've got a myriad of different data types that are availability. And at the moment, I'm going to choose int. I'm going to find int on my list. I'm going to click on it. Int is short for integer, which means it's a whole number. And basically that's it. Am I going to allow null values inside here? Well, no, not a good idea on an ID column. And then what I'm going to do is underneath it, I'm going to put in name. And then when I press tab again, it then gives me nchar as the default. And you've got to have a think, and I'm going to bring it up on the next video. Why do you think it's defaulting to this? So what we're going to do is we're going to go and have a look. And what have we got in here? Well, I'm going to choose the nvarchar field. And it's saying, do I want to allow nulls? Well, no, again on that. Now I'm going to put in gender. And again, I'm going to just start typing now, nvar. There we go, nvarchar's come up. But I'm going to allow null values on that one. And then let's say that's it. I'm going to click onto save. And I'm going to call this employees. And I'll click onto OK. Job done. But wait. I've created an employees table. Where is it? It's not there. Well, Management Studio doesn't poll SQL Server every few seconds to get the information. For example, how many tables do you think a database can have? Well, I'll give you a clue. It's more than 0 and less than 50,000. There's a lot of tables that you can actually have inside here. Now, if you imagine a large production-based database system, it would be polling constantly saying, well, what are all the tables? What are all the data types? What are the columns? It would just take forever. So instead, what it does is it's up to you to reload or refresh the screen. So by clicking on this, it will now refresh. Now, just to point out, this refresh button is dependent on where you are. It's sensitive to where you are. So for example, if I expand this now and look at columns, I can see that I've got ID, name, and gender. Well, that's exactly the same as what we've got in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a new field called test, leave it on nchar, and save. Now, when you do your refresh, it's just important to note where you are in the world, because if I select it here and refresh, I'm only going to refresh the employees table and below, not everything else. So on larger database systems, try and be very selective of where you are on the actual Object Explorer. So I'm just going to click on to refresh again here, and voila, when I expand columns, there's test. In my case, I want it gone. So I'm just going to save that again. And then by refreshing over here in columns, it's now gone. So that's the important thing, just to understand about the refresh button. So how do we enter information into it? Well, we can right click on it, and then we have an option of edit top 200 rows. There's 0 rows in here at the moment. So there we go. We've got nothing on here whatsoever. And now I can now start putting in some numbers and text. And there we go. Off we go. So we could be here for a month of Sundays filling all this information in. Moreover, we're not really keeping consistency. Check the ID column is a good example of this. I put in 1 and 3. Where's 2? What happens if I put in 1 again? Will it let me? Well, absolutely, because we've not defined on that table any form of database restriction, any kind of data control over what data is being populated in it. Hell, ID column, I don't really care about. It's more to create a unique reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight all these rows and I'm going to do delete. Are you sure you want to get rid of them? Absolutely, they're gone. Now let's go back into the employees table again. ID, we said we didn't want to allow nulls, but we didn't say anything about duplication. So how do we stop duplication? Well, this comes into a concept called a primary key, and I'm going to go into that in a lot of detail in another video. But at the moment, suffice to say, a primary key is the unique reference to label or pinpoint a specific row on your system. So in our case, ID is the right candidate. It's like the employee number. So what we're going to do is just making sure we're on ID. You see that there's a key button. Clicking on that sets the primary key. Job done. Right, so if we just save that now, that's fixed one of our two challenges. So if I go back to the employee table, and then I'm going to now leave ID alone, and I'm just going to put in my name. And when I press tab now, it says, oh dear, you cannot insert null into column ID. Insert fails. Well, if you recall, we set up that field as being not null. But hang on a minute. Do we need to put a number in? Yes, because we're not telling it to automatically populate a number. So if we just now tab this again, there we go, it's in. Now, if I put in 2 and say Fred, male, and I'm going to leave it blank now and do Sally and female. And then when I press tab, doesn't allow us. So we have now created a field which definitely retains consistency because you've got to have something populated in there. But more importantly, what if I go back in here and I just say, that's number 1. So I've populated it, but when I tab out to go to the next row down, I'm going to get the problem now, because now it's not about it being blank, it's the violation of the primary key. You cannot insert duplicate key values. Well, obviously I can't have 2 employee number 1. So if I change that to a 3 and I do a tab, there we go, we're working. Awesome. Now, I want to go back in and I want to embellish this further. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 3 rows. I'm going to delete them, get rid of them all again. And then inside here, I want to do something a bit smarter. I do not want to be typing in ID numbers over and over again. So on here, in the properties, we have a section down here called identity specification. Identity meaning knowing what it is. Now, if we click on the triangle here to expand it, it says, is it an identity? Well, yes, it's a unique identity. I mean, that's what ID stands for. So what I'm going to do is change that from no to yes. And as you get more comfortable with SQL Management Studio, just double click, does the same job. So at that point, yes. What is the identity increment? I want it to go up by 1 because it's an integer. And what is the identity seed? Meaning, what number are we starting from? I want it to start on 1. So now when I click on to save, I have now got a field, technically, saving change, you required the drop and recreated. Oh, goody. Right, I'm glad we got this. Let's just have a talk about this for a moment. SQL likes you to do everything via SQL commands. So I could have done this by using the alter table SQL script, which I tend to use a lot. However, when we're just doing our initial foray into SQL, you want to use designers, but don't rely on them too much. You will want to make that jump to commands sooner rather than later. But when you're finding your feet, you need to visualize what you've got. So the grid view is great. If I wanted to add a column, I could have done it much quicker by just typing it in on a command prompt. In this case, we're changing the fundamental structure of the table now. And in this case, we're telling it now, I want you to have an ID field, which is going to increment, and it's also a primary key. Now, that is too much for the designer by default to support. So it says, I'm going to prevent doing these changes in this particular designer. Well, I'll let you into a little secret. You can change it. If I click onto cancel, if you Google it, you'll also find the same answer. But if you go into tools and then into options, this controls everything to do with Management Studio. And specifically, there's a section about the designers. And if we expand designers, we've got table and database designers. Well, we're in a table designer. Clicking into this tick box here, prevent save changes that require table recreation. Well, I'm going to turn that off and click onto OK. Now, production systems, that needs to stay on. Anything you do purposefully, which could change an actual fundamental table structure, which means it's got to delete it and recreate it. Oh boy, if you've got thousands of records in here and you change a data type and it says, well, I've got to take a copy of all the data, put it somewhere else, change the table and then put all the data back again. If you did this through here, you could bring systems down. So for testing, I always turn this off, but you may want to get into the habit of making sure on production systems that is turned on. So if I click on OK, now if I click on save, it should just do it. There we go, boom, it's gone straight through. So it's now applied it. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click onto this just to refresh, re-execute everything. Now, the reason I've done that is because that will now taught this editor that you've now got a unique identity seed. And in worst case scenario, you'll need to close it and go back into edit top 200. So I'm going to leave ID blank now. I'm going to put my name in again. Now, magic is going to happen, yes or no? Yay! There we go. We have got an ID of 1. So I no longer need to use the ID column. I can now just put in whatever I want and away we go. And next question you may have on the back of your head is, well, can I put in the number 50? I don't know if the sound smart sound editing has took away the typing, but I'm typing frantically. Nothing is happening. It won't let you because it is now an identity seed and therefore it is in control of the computer. There are things you can do later on. For example, if you're running out of numbers, we're going to talk about data types. And if you reach the upper range of int, and I've seen this in certain companies where we've just literally run out of numbers. What we found is there's been large swathes of numbers of like 5,000 records here, 4,000 records here, where the numbers have been completely deleted. So we could reuse them again. So you can reseed, but that comes with its own challenges as well. But Identity Seed, awesome. I use it pretty much everywhere I go, even when it comes to things like temporary tables, which we'll get to in other videos. You need to be able to have a form of identity seed to pinpoint the records quite easily. So at that point, I'll just click on to close here, and I've now created my table. Now, I could keep going on for a long time and creating lots of different tables and just keep going through all of this. We're going to talk about data types in the next video, which is a very important topic to go through. I'm just talking about creating a table. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a very good way of creating lots of tables very quickly. So I'm going to just delete my employees table I've created because it's just full of rubbish. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to quite a useful little site which you can get some fabulous test data from. So I'm going to go into Edge I've got here, and then I've already got it all queued up. It's called Mockaroo. Now, I'm not sponsored by Mockaroo in any way. They are one of many providers out there where they can give you sample data. I just like Mockaroo for its simplicity. It's very easy to use. It's a slick front end. If you wanted more than 1,000 records of data, you can by setting up a plan, and it'll cost you about $60 a year to be able to utilize something where I want 10,000 records or 100,000 records and so on. But by and large, I find 1,000 records is more than adequate to start with. So inside here, what have we got? Well, it's giving you a default sort of layout straight away. Everyone gets this when they first come onto this site, but you may want a particular use case. So for example, I want users. So I'm going to click onto this generate fields using AI, and I want users. And how many fields do I want? Well, let's leave it on 10. Let's see what happens. Then I've got this replace existing fields or add fields. Do I want to add this lot to the pre-existing stuff or completely wipe it? I want it wiped, gone, go away. So now what it will do is it will go away, and there we are. We've got a user ID, a username, email, first name, last name, all the way down to profile pictures. Well, I'm going to tidy this up a little bit. I'm not interested in some of these things. So for example, I'm not interested in what have we got? The profile picture. I don't want that. Gender, yeah, absolutely. Birthday, fine. Actually, no, gender I'm going to take away. Now, the reason I say that is because you've also got to tie in the fact is because this is all randomly generated data. It doesn't happen all the time, but you've got to consider this. If the user is male, who's to say that the gender field, which is being randomly generated, is going to put in male? So you've got to consider the fact is that the genders could go all over the place. You could have Lord Williamson III, who's actually been brought in as a lady, which may be true. So anyway, in here, what we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of gender. I want birth date, and you can see it's giving us 1950 through to 2003. I'm very happy with that. I'm going to just change the format though to something that's consistent for SQL to understand, which will be in a year, month, day. Your mileage may vary. It's based on your locale settings on your PC. So if you're in America, month, day, year is going to work, whereas day, month, year wouldn't work if you're in the UK. To get around all those headaches, year, month, day is universal. It's a UTC type date format, which is accepted everywhere. I've got country, I've got phone number. Yeah, that's fine. Email address, username. I'm not interested in, because I'm going to say my user ID is my username. So I'm going to just get rid of that. And then anything else on here? Well, I think that's actually quite a good spectrum of different bits of data types. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to click onto the generate data, and this will now create 1,000 random pieces of information called mock data, which has now been downloaded for us to actually consume. So I'm going to jump straight back into SQL, and we're going to get this in. Now, one thing that always trips me up, you'll see me on other videos doing this, is I want to insert data into either a pre-existing table or a table, a brand new table. I would immediately right click on tables, and then I'll go, oh, I can't insert, because the insertion of data is actually at the database level. So don't fall into the trap. I've been doing this job for 30 years and I always do it. Right click here and it's never there. It's on the database. In here, tasks, and then down here you've got import flat file and import data file. we're going to do fat file because your mileage may vary when it comes to importing data. Import data allows you to bring in text files, Excel files, CSVs, other data formats. There's a lot going on in here. And in actual fact, what it does is it uses the underpinning SSIS, which is SQL Server Integration Services, to do quite a lot of the work, and that's going to be separate training later on. So you can try it, but it's just text-based data because it's CSV. So I'm just going to say import flat file, and then it comes up with a little wizard just saying, I've got a text file, I want to do something with it, and then put it into SQL. So I'm going to just click onto next. Where's my file? I'm going to go and click onto my browse and into my downloads. And into my downloads, I've got my mock data. I'm going to click on OK or open. Immediately brings in the name as being mock data. Well, I know this is my users table. And then we've got the table schema. More on that in a moment. I'm going to click onto next. And there we go. We've got all of our information being shown. And I'm quite happy just to leave it like that. And then I'm going to click onto next. Then it comes up saying, okay, well, I've had a look at the data and I've worked out some determinations. So for example, birth date, it's worked out, it's a date field. Everything else, user ID, it's worked out, it's a small int. So that's fine. Let's just click on to next. I'm quite happy with that because it's just test data. We're going to fiddle around with it and do whatever we want. Now that's done. Again, remember about refreshing. I'm going to click onto my tables, click onto refresh, and voila, there's our users table. And if I now select the top 1,000 rows, there happens to be 1,000 rows in here. There we go. I've now got data that I can use, reuse, and I've got something so good I can utilize it on my training videos. Now, what I have done though is I have created a database already, which has already got all the data that I want to actually utilize in. However, we can use this, or you can use this more importantly, to make your own data up from scratch. Mockaroo is a very good place to start with to create your mock-ups of what you need. I'm not going to go into details of absolutely everything. However, you can see that you have all sorts of different bits. Sometimes what you're looking for may not be there, but it could be there, but just under a different area. So for example, I was looking for country codes the other day, and I can see that I've got country and I've got country code, but you may want to use the airport country code or the country name, etc. So just go and have a play. You'll find there's lots of good stuff inside here. I mean, there's a whole section on IT, there's a whole section on nature, personal information, products, movie genres and things like that. So there's lots you can go into on here. So for now, that will do. And we've now created our initial table. Now, the last thing with tables we need to understand before we conclude this session is more to do with this first part. What the hell is DBO? Right, DBO, database owner or database object, depends on where you are in the world. DBO is the default schema, and what you'll find is because it's the default schema, I don't actually need to define it. I'm going to just tidy this query up a little bit. So I'm saying select star from training database DBO users. Yeah, well, that's because it's the training database DBO users. But what I could do is I could just get rid of all of that. Well, why? Well, first of all, I'm already in the training database and DBO is the default. So by doing this and just executing, I get the same results. It's just I'm not putting in DBO in front of it. So the question becomes, why? Why have we got this? Well, it's because when you get into larger systems, you may want to segregate your data into different areas. For example, you could have two users tables, one for Americas, one for Europe. You could have different types of table, some which are system required and some which are end user required. So you could have a system schema. So how do we use these schemas? Do they get used a lot? Well, to my annoyance, not much. A lot of people just stick with the DBO and have done. So a lot of development, third-party applications I've seen which sit on top of SQL, they have no concept of table schemas. Some do, and I'm very pleased that they do, but there's a lot out there which don't. They will just actually just prefix their table to say this is a system table, so sys underscore and then the table name, so it's staying on DBO. And my argument is, well, if you've got something in SQL that supports it, you should be using it. So how do we set them up? Well, oddly enough, this is not really anything you do in the table section. This is actually a security element, because the advantage is you may want to set up your users to access all the DBO tables, but never once access any of the admin tables. So what do we do? Well, in security, what we have is we have users, roles, and schemas. Users is where we go to create, obviously, new users. Roles is what they're allowed to look at, and schemas is the underpinning data. So when we expand this, you'll see that we've got DBO, and that relates to the DBO that we've just been talking about up here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new schema. So right click, new schema, and it's ever so easy. What do you want to call it? Well, I'm going to call this one admin. But admin, for security reasons, needs to have an owner, because otherwise you can create it and then nobody can get into it. So by default, the schema owner should really be the same owner as the database, which happens to be DBO, which again is a user, well, an owner on the system. So I'm going to click onto OK here, and that will now create that schema. We've got DBO. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now do the scripting approach to create a table. So I'm going to say create table, and I'm going to say it's now admin.test table. And then inside here, I'm going to start giving it its fields that I want. So I want an ID column of int. I want it to be an identity seed. And it's going to be starting increments of 1, starting at 1. And that's my first field. However, I also want it to be a primary key, so I can actually cheat and just do it right here. And I want that to be a primary key. So now I want the name field, and I'm going to say this is nvarchar 50. And I'm going to say that you're not allowed to put any nulls in. And then finally, let's just have another one, which is age. I'm going to leave this as a small int field, and I'm going to allow nulls in that. And there we go. Now, notice the squiggles. Specifically, I'm going to just get rid of the select here. Another really useful tip here is, what's that red squiggle all about? Well, when you hover over it, it tends to try and tell you. It says, well, the schema doesn't exist. Ooh, this is the refresh thing again. Now, the difference is we've had the refresh button over here, and we can see the information, but it doesn't do over here. Now, wonderful keyboard shortcut. You're going to love me for this. Control, Shift, and R. If you hold down Control, Shift, and R and press it and just wait a few seconds, this forces it to reload the cache. And it now goes back to the training database and says, okay, what fields have I got? What tables have I got? What queries have I got? Well, what views have I got? What indexes have I got? And it reloads them all into the cache. Notice how the squiggle's now gone. It now identifies and knows that admin exists. So anytime you start getting squiggles and you're going, I know the field exists, it's because your actual editing window, your query, hasn't been refreshed. So Control Shift R is a really handy keyboard shortcut, and I use it 3 or 4 times a day minimum. So get used to using it. So I've got that now. I'm just going to press F5 to execute, and all being well, I've now got a command completed successfully. It's created that table, but again, the table, test table, doesn't exist. So I'm going to go in here and just do refresh. And voila, there we go. We've now got a table sitting on a completely different table schema. And then ultimately what you can do with this is in your users, or more specifically your roles, you can control who's allowed to see what table schemas. So by default, you just set up your end user. They can only access DBO. They can't see admin. Only DBAs, database administrators, can see the admin tables. And that is really what table schemas are all about. Don't confuse these with normal schemas, because you can talk about this being a schema. A schema just means design. So at this point, a table schema is all about where it lives in the world. And you will notice as well, if I wanted to rename these, I can click into here and right click and choose rename. But notice what doesn't come along: the table schema, because that is now permanently in the admin section. So to move data from one schema to another, we have to do a slightly different way. However, I'm just going to press escape to get rid of it. So what have we learned today? We've learned how to create a table from scratch. We haven't delved into data types in any great deal. That's the next video. After that, we've then got table schemas and also ways of actually introducing data into our system as test data as quickly as possible. What we need to do is we need to start playing with the data. And this is where I love my job, is just basically playing with the data. I've got these tables. How do I put them together? Well, that is what I do for a living, and I really enjoy it, and I want it to go as fast as possible. So performance is definitely going to be a slant on all of these training videos. So I hope you've enjoyed today. Next video, we're going to be talking about data types, and that one is interesting. See you next time.